Before I get into the actual review of this film, I want to deliver a brief anecdote of my own personal experience to you. This anecdote isn't expressly paranormal, but when I experienced it, it certainly did feel that way. I was around 8 or 9 years old. I don't actually know the age. I just have a memory of it being around there. And we were visiting my grandparents up in Michigan. Their house they've lived in the same house for a long time. So it's this old house in the middle of the country, 6 miles in either direction from any town. And I remember I got up one night to get a glass of water. And I went downstairs and everything's dark, so I was kind of sneaking around to make sure I didn't wake anyone up. And I'm just filled with this dread that I couldn't describe then, and I honestly can't really describe now. It's that feeling you get when you're like in a room at night and all the lights are off except for one maybe, and you can see out into the hallway and it's just this doorway of pitch black. It's that kind of feeling that I felt back then. And Oz Perkins, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, captures that feeling so well. It's scary. The fact that this is a Netflix original film is a shame. It does not deserve to be landlocked to Netflix. It deserves to have physical copies out there. It is so fucking good. By the time when it came out, he had only really made one other film, and that was The Black Coat's Daughter, which is also amazing. But at the time, with just 2 films at the time, he had embarrassed practically most contemporary horror directors, where in his slow burn just horrors, where the fear predominantly arises from his quite honestly amazing just technique with the camera. Symmetrical framing that he uses to highlight negative space, juxtaposition of colors with a minimalist approach. It just makes his films some of the most impressive out there, in my opinion. I Am the Pretty Thing distributes its terror drip by drip, like a faucet not quite closed enough. The menace of it just always remains right out of sight, barely audible and out of sight. It takes this house, takes the haunted house approach to a whole new, more nuanced, more controlled level than we usually get. While we do get shots of the exterior of the home, we never leave the confines of its area. It becomes the center of the film's world, an ostensibly calm entity that isn't set on plunging its occupants into a fresh new hell, but rather embracing them and wanting to consume them into the sunken depths of itself. Funnily enough, when I read House of Leaves back in the day, I was immediately reminded of this film. House of Leaves is arguably one of the most unadaptable novels of all time. as in it can't even be adapted to an audiobook or a PDF because the experience of reading it is so intrinsically linked to the physical object of the book that making it into an ebook or an audiobook almost fucking removes the entire point. You're not experiencing it the same way. They're entirely different experiences if you read it or if you listen to it than just physically hold it in your hands and read it. And even besides that, the way it plays with the literary form so proficiently that any cinematic or auditory depiction of the work, it would just completely lose a terror depicted within the novel. And yet, the film also has that weirdly delicate sense of horror where the things are not as they seem, and even at points genuinely horrific, but it's only in the background. In both the book and in both House of Leaves and I Am the Pretty Thing, the terror is still. It remains slowly and quietly seeping fear into the flesh and the bone of the people that are inexplicably drawn to this off-kilter strangeness. Funnily enough, the two works actually complement each other really quite well. House of Leaves, a book about a mysterious film, and I Am the Pretty Thing, a film about a mysterious book. Which, by the way, I genuinely want to read The Lady in the Walls from the brief bits we hear of it in the film. Perkins' film, it drifts between the past and the present, and these presences overlap. Blood spilt so many years ago has ceased to dry up and has instead remained fresh in the walls of the house. His simple but highly effective symmetry and framing, such as an empty chair in the forefront of the frame, perhaps indicating the presence of another being, or the black of the night versus the white of the walls, or the arches of doorways always keeping protagonist Lily within an enclosed space. It creates such an uneasy essence within the film. He never wavers from his technical tendencies, even with the few jump scares that are in it. They remain genuinely surprising and highly effective thanks to his very smart editing. He obviously seems to have studied the horror classics, which makes sense because his father was the actor who played Norman Bates, Anthony Perkins. He seems to have studied the classics and even the modern failures for that matter, and he's stripped them of their desperate attempt to distinctly be horror and just created his own this despairing, lonely atmosphere where this house full of dark memories comes alive, books full of fictitious words metamorphose into the real, and terror is destined to entwine itself within the flesh. There are no doubt horror films that will conjure up more popcorn-spilling scares, in air quotes, and worlds of darker imagination, but it's these kinds of films that engrave themselves in my brain way less often. There's something about the inevitability, the inability to stop horrific things from coming for you, seeing them unfold slowly right in front of you, that makes those types of works just so enveloped in dread for me, and they're just difficult to shake. It reminds me a lot of Shirley Jackson's work. A lot. Even the main character speaks like she's from one of the novels, which makes sense. This is one of those films that I feel the more you watch it, which I've watched it at least 5 or 6 times at this point, the more you would notice it and garner from it. There's a precision to every scene that is immediately sensed and not immediately studied in its entirety. This was most affecting to me as an examination of the way trauma can pervert experience. Forgetting something as enormous as your own death because it's just too much of a horror to bear. Not recognizing your own personhood in the face of your own fear. But also, this has one of the single most viscerally affecting opening monologues of any movie I've seen in a while. It's like someone dumped icy water down your spine, like the smell of perfume in an odd place, the shifting shape you thought you saw from the corner of your eye. It's like something from your dream. Or maybe it's something you've only felt and been previously able to articulate, like deja vu that rattles your heart into your throat. It's something you've always known, but you just can't remember where you learned it. And personally, the opening line of that monologue will forever be grafted onto my brain. It just will. I have heard myself say that a house with a death in it can never be bought or sold by the living. That's just ingrained in my mind forever. It's so fucking good. The fact that this film isn't widely regarded as a horror classic and a masterpiece of the genre is a fucking sin. And it's an indictment on horror fans everywhere that there's not enough people praising it. It is one of my absolute favorite horror films of all time, and I stand by that 100%. Thank you for listening to my review of I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, directed by Oz Perkins. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why don't you, like the video? If you liked it or dislike it, I don't care. Either gives me fucking engagement. So, whichever you want to do, whichever. Leave a comment if you have something to say, I guess. I don't know. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now, motherfuckers. Bye-bye.